Video games today are reaching a point where they look, sound,
I'm going to die.
and even feel like real life. Thanks to the huge advancements in artificial intelligence,
We have to cook.
production softwares, and the stuff we play our games on, we are now able to experience insane amounts of detail across most of our human senses. Every year we are presented with a plethora of hyper-realistic games that make the barrier between real life and a video game ever more ambiguous. I mean, take for example the stuff that is coming out of Unreal Engine, a software that is now used to make games that are basically getting called too realistic. One example is the somewhat recent gameplay release of Unrecord. I mean, you can understand why people are saying all those things even if you just watch a few seconds of gameplay. Yet somehow, no matter how realistic a game seems to be, we always seem to know when something isn't real. Something in our brain makes us feel uneasy or unconvinced by non-real things, and this usually applies to hyper-realistic games. I mean, when you think about it, reality is perhaps the thing that blurs the lines between objectivity and subjectivity the most. With this in mind, the discussion into what factors should be considered when a game is called realistic really opens up for debate. So with that said, let's explore this narrowing divide between reality and video games. Now, I think Albert was right when they thought it would be a good idea to look at the past to better understand the future. So, Mr. Einstein, let's have a little look into some history of video game graphics. One of the first visual display games we got as Homo sapiens was this game, OXO, an interactive game of tic-tac-toe or noughts and crosses. Very simple, very basic, but for the 1950s, very advanced. Then the people of the 20th century received one of their first multiplayer games. Played on a dedicated gaming device, this game and the games that followed allowed rich white families to further grow the divide in social class. I mean, this thing was literally priced at just under $100 at the time, which in today's money would be just a cheeky $728. Worth every penny, I guess, when you see the graphics.
Joking.
Regardless of how limited these graphics seem to us today, the demand for such luxury items throughout the 60s and 70s grew larger and larger. This snowball effect was mainly centralized in America, and American technology companies soon found themselves having to battle it out for precious customers. Now, this situation, according to economics, encourages producers to innovate in order to stand out within their competition. And a brilliant way to stand out is to make the games more visually pleasing, as this is the thing that everyone sees. With every new console came the abilities to further maximize the looks of the game, and to ensure people actually enjoy the game, it also had to deliver on the gameplay side of things, which is a topic for another video. So if you follow on this snowball effect, you can see how gradually these games got better and better throughout the decades. Of course, this linear progression is not completely solid. It isn't always the case that just because a game comes out later in time, it has better graphics or visuals. I mean, even if you compare, for example, Batman Arkham Knight to the newly released Suicide Squad, then you have a great example of a clear outlier in this trend. Sometimes these dips in quality can be explained by the developers not having enough time or money on their hands, or they just simply wanted to cash in as soon as possible. But generally, there has been a somewhat steady increase in the visual quality of video games. That is, until now. What you're seeing now is what people at Unreal Engine have come up with. This interface basically allows you to create hyper-realistic scenes in literally a matter of seconds. People have now used this software to create hyper-realistic games that genuinely sometimes look indistinguishable from real life, just like Unrecord, which was mentioned at the start of the video. However, it seems to almost always be the case that we somehow feel a bit weird or uncomfortable when we see these images, almost like these feelings are being produced because somewhere we know that they might not be real at all. Like take for example these renders from metahumans.
I need performance capture to work like a mirror. I need it to capture whether I'm acting scared or angry. And sometimes all I need is a look.
By the way, these were made in like 5 minutes in a live demo, so yeah, pretty insane. But even when you see other clips of these hyper-realistic human face renders, you may still feel like something is off, and that might be because of something called the uncanny valley. The uncanny valley is a hypothesis that can explain why we may feel a bit uncomfortable when we see these non-realistic yet realistic human faces. It states that as the appearance of a robot or now artificially generated face is made more human, some observers' emotional response to those renders becomes increasingly positive and empathetic until it becomes almost human like we have in metahumans, and at that point the response quickly becomes strong revulsion. One of the many reasons why this happens is that we humans have a lot of brain power dedicated to processing human face cues, and for that reason we tend to be extremely good at doing this. So when we are faced with these convincing yet not perfect human resemblance, we can get these feelings of uncomfortability. However, we are not as well equipped to do this with our external environment, or at least images or videos, so we tend to struggle with it. The external environment is much more unpredictable, and our schemas, our collection of ideas that constitute a defined thing, haven't really had enough time to adapt to fully recognize reality from artificial intelligence. I guess one of the things that stands out to me in the kind of question what is real life and what is a render of real life, in the case of the faces specifically, is the lack of fluidity in these faces. In normal life, we shift our facial expressions rather fluidly. Like, we don't just smile and then just immediately frown or have a bit of lag in between. So for me, that is a very clear cue of an artificially generated image. The devil is in fact in the details, especially when it comes to faces. However, it could be very well the case that in the future, we will no longer be able to tell what's a game and what's a video of real life. But if this ever happens, will this become a problem in the context of gaming? I'm intrigued on what you guys think, so please do comment down below what you think. Okay, so it's clear. We are now entering an era of gaming where the games we play look awfully similar to real life. In other words, what's the point of touching grass when this rendered piece of grass looks just as good? But to be honest, what all this does to my brain is raise a question. If these games look real, or try to imitate aspects of real life, are they more real than other games that have different graphics? Because at the end of the day, reality is a highly subjective experience. Everyone experiences reality in different ways, and just because this woodlands looks hyper-realistic, it may mean little to you if you live in a city, or you actually hate the woods, or simply don't care about video game graphics. I guess to tie it back to the uncanny valley and the visual systems, we Homo sapiens take a shit ton of stimuli from our environment, and usually, through some high-level functioning, we evoke our responses for those stimuli in the forms of thoughts, ideas, actions, and emotions, which, of course, as we stated previously, are a subjective experience, and these outputs on our environments will be different across individuals, hence the term individual differences. So in that way, is a game that increases the quantity and quality of your outputs on your environment a more realistic game? Sure, focusing on visuals is a highly effective way of maximizing the likelihood of making stuff feel real. However, most, if not all humans are blessed with copious amounts of empathy and abilities to personify objects and items, even to a point that regardless of graphics, we can evoke emotions and in some cases develop emotional attachments with non-realistic looking games. In a way then, realism in gaming can take many forms, but hyperrealism specifically focuses on the immediate cues to reality like the visual and auditory systems. It then tries to mimic them as well as possible in a gaming context. Doing so is placing a safe bet that the gamer will feel immersed in their game even before they actually buy it. However, when you're talking about realism in gaming in a general context, you have to remember the subjective nature of reality itself. So just because this game doesn't look like the things you see every day, it doesn't mean they are any less realistic. If we conceptualize reality as things that contribute to our conscious progression as human beings, like thoughts, feelings, and actions, then all games, no matter their resemblance to real life, can be considered realistic. So with all that said, what is the point of these hyper-realistic games? Well, first of all, they are a hallmark of how far game development has come. It shows the combination of how human and human-made artificial intelligence can join forces to create something breathtaking. It also shows how we humans have certain psychological barriers to things that just don't seem to be real, and further exposes how our cognitive systems are wired in cool and interesting ways. This development in the gaming industry will change things forever. It makes games easier and cheaper to make, which is a plus for both consumer and producer. However, these SKUs should not be evidence for everyone to start developing hyper-realistic games. Instead, it should provide game developers motivation to stretch their imaginations to create worlds, stories, and ideas that evoke emotion, whilst also knowing they have access to the necessary tools to make their ideas a reality. I mean, if every game looks hyper-realistic, then what's the point? Games should evoke emotions. They should tap into our subjective experience as human beings and take us on a journey, whatever that may be. That way, who is to say that they are not realistic? No experience is ever the same, and what you're experiencing now will never happen in the same way ever again. Whether you play a game that looks like real life or you play one that is the furthest thing from it, reality only extends as far as you allow it to.
You create the narrative.
I am metahuman.